My name is Craig Thomas. I'm the usability consultant for Adido, and I look after the usability department. Okay? So what I'm going to do today is a little overview. I'm going to explain what usability is, why it's important, and how we do it at Adido. Explain a little bit more what the process is, exactly what we do. Okay? So firstly, I'd like to start with a nipple. Okay, so this is a semi-famous quote from Bruce, and effectively says that the only intuitive interface is the human nipple. When we're born, we don't really know much. We can't talk, we can't walk, can't crawl, can't even hold our heads up properly. We're pretty useless when we're born, okay? So how we evolve this is thinking and learning, which we pick up our entire lives, and each individual will be different. Our mind is made of roughly 100 billion neurons, each interconnected differently between every single individual. So every one of us is different. Every one of us will work in different ways. So we have to take that into consideration when changing things or designing new ways of how we expect a user to do things, because that uniqueness is inherent in all of us. Okay? So what is usability? Anybody hazard a guess? I know there's a few in the front who have some experience with usability, but I won't pick anyone, I promise.
Use of a site, a website, how to use a website.
Yeah.
How easy it is to use.
Effectively, yeah. In the context of websites, what we're going to use today, usability is the science, as you were, of how to get a user from A to B and to make them be able to use something. Okay, so in this case of a website, it's going to be how do they get through a checkout process? How do they get from step one to purchase? How do they do that? And how do we make that easier so they do get that far? Okay, so there's a nice little diagram. So everything else, star. What I mean by star is that everything else in the terms of an improvement tool on today's website arsenal of what we can use to improve things, usability is one of the best. Okay, it's a very low, cost-effective way of improving A to make it better than B, C, whatever. To explain this further, I've got a little analogy. Let's say you owned a petrol station on a busy highway. So you've got 1,000 people coming down this road. There's quite a lot of traffic. So there's a lot of pickings, perhaps, on the people that could turn into your gas station, your petrol station. So let's say 10 people do. Is that efficient? No? Nope, it wouldn't be, because 990 people, they drive straight past. They don't care. So that's how other techniques work. They pump up the traffic. That doesn't affect how many people turn in. The people who turn in is by utter chance on most occasions. Usability could be the road sign. That's 2 miles up the road and says, there's a petrol station coming up. Get ready to pull in if you need petrol. That will increase the amount of people that pull in because they know perhaps that they need petrol or they want to grab something else. So then they pull in. So that will increase what we call the conversion rate of how many from that traffic actually come to where we want them to. So that percentage that come in, that's the number we care about. We don't really care about the traffic on the road. All we care about is people that pull in. So that's where usability comes into itself, of how to get those people to come in and become at home. So for that reason, if the traffic did die down, and let's say it was now 500 cars instead of 1,000, the percentage of people that come in isn't going to change. It's still going to be the same. So let's say 20 people came in with 1,000, and now it reduces to 500, which is considerably less spend, then you still got 10 for a lot less money. So that's why usability as a tool is extremely cost effective. It's not about pushing things in a hole and hoping they fit. It's about making that hole the right size. Okay? So usability. I'm going to consult my notes on these ones, because usability has a lovely, boring definition. Okay, the boring definition. Usability is the extent of which a product can be used by specified users to achieve specified goals with effectiveness, efficiency, and satisfaction in a specified context of use. What's that mean? It means everything. It covers everything. So it's not a really good definition, to be honest. In short terms, let's just call it fantastic, because that's what usability is. Okay? So going on, why usability is important? Obviously it is, but why? So there's 4 little paths. 1. Okay? And does anyone know who Jacob Nielsen is? Haven't heard his name before? Yeah? He's quite the famous usability consultant. He's been around tens of years. He's been around from the start of the web, for example, so he knows what he's talking about. And the way he states it is, usability rules the web. And it's an obvious thing to say because if someone can't find something, they won't buy it. It's one of those obvious things that we all know. We all know when designing something that that's the case. We need to make sure that a person can get there and use it. Although a lot of us make it very, very, very difficult for some people to do that without possibly knowing why. So there's loads of websites that perhaps, as Mark was covering earlier, with basket top right. If that was changed and became, let's say, in the middle somewhere, that user doesn't know where to look. They've added, say, 2 items to the basket. They want to now check the price that they're expected to pay on those 2. They're now lost. They start thinking, as Mark covered. Once they start thinking, they're starting to learn again. That's when their process comes back into their mind and they think, intuitively, I don't know how to use this. And I really don't care to learn. I'm going. There's going to be another competitor that did have a top right, and that could be that single little thing. That could be the single reason that that person lost £200 in a sale, perhaps. It could be that easy. So another thing with this is hands up if you have a smartphone. Okay, that's pretty much everyone. But the next stat is based on the UK average. So 40 to 50% of the people in the UK own a smartphone and they use it, on a regular basis. Okay, so I'm sure you can all agree with that you all use it too. Does anyone actively shop using a mobile phone? No? It's quite a few people though. So if you came to a website, an e-commerce site, you wanted to buy a product, they didn't have a mobile site. How does that make you feel? Do you feel slightly betrayed? Perhaps thinking, Christ, they haven't got a mobile site. I don't know if I can trust them with my money because they haven't thought about me doing this. Therefore, how are they going to think about getting to me on time? And maybe Mark's bad experience earlier, that they didn't have a mobile site. So this has now become expected. And again, as Andy covered earlier, this is on the rise. By 2015, we're expecting mobile to overtake the desktop PC and become the dominant device. And when we say mobile, we mean phones, tablets, anything a person can carry. Okay? So if that's expected, there's a lot of sites today that don't deliver on that. They're missing that key ingredient, perhaps, of not going there. And that's because not a lot of sites do need it, perhaps. It's going to be based on their individual needs of their percentage of audience that do use a mobile device, and whether or not that site, if they come on from mobile, is usable or not. Most cases, it should be okay, especially if someone comes on with an iPad whose screen resolution will fit more standard websites. But there's always going to be those odd, especially e-commerce sites, where there's a small issue. So fixing those will immediately give trust, user loyalty, satisfaction, all the things we want. Okay? So the second reason, studies indicate users prefer usable websites. It's a very, very obvious thing to say. But again, it's one of those things that's always overlooked. Usability as a profession and as something people employ is very, very, very underused. It's all about visual design these days. Let's make it look good. People like things that look good. Not necessarily the case. They like to know how to use things. So in this example, studies indicate users prefer usable websites. One of the studies I'll mention is carried out by a fellow called Flavian, and he studied perceived usability. So not physical usability, but perceived usability, how a person thinks how usable something could be just by looking at it. And they found that websites with a higher degree of perceived usability had greater user loyalty, satisfaction, and the return rate was much better. Effectively, usability increased those 3 areas. So it's a win-win-win. And once they're fixed once, they're fixed for good. They don't tend to break easily. Once you've got a mobile site, it might be another year till you need to update that. If it's done correctly in the first place, you're fine. they can now use that, and they're going to start reaping the benefits of having that without spending every month to try and keep it up. Spend it once, done. That can now be used. Second point. Contrary to these studies, many websites are ignorant to usability. It is in the sort of perhaps culture we live in at the moment where we all have websites, but we're not 100% sure the best way to perhaps go about them. So it's even key of big sites like Andy mentioned earlier with eBay. They have a lot of money, and they haven't noticed that potentially that button costs them a certain percentage of sales, and that's going to continue to happen until that's fixed. So there's no way they could know about that unless they had some sort of usability process to find out those issues and fix them going forward. Okay. Finally, consider the full audience. The disability prevalence, like the UK body who handles in disabilities, they estimate there are 10.8 million people in the UK who are disabled. And a study carried out by the United Nations as a global web accessibility study found that 97% of websites fail to meet basic accessibility requirements. So 97 websites fail. And that's ultimately how those 10.8 million people see that. And the actual number, if you look at those 10.8 million people as well, 36% of those are suggested to having access to the internet. So that's roughly 4 million people day to day in the UK alone who are actively trying to use a website where 97% of the space they can't. A website comes into the same public domain as access to a building. If a disabled user can't get access to it, they do have a right to sue you, basically. They can, because it's something they can't use, and it should be open to everyone. So again, this is accessibility comes into usability, and that stops those particular groups of users using that. So we aim to fix that issue originally. And if we merge those findings with today's increasing population age, we're all getting older, we're living longer, and because we're living longer, we tend to have more illnesses the older we get. So that population of disabled, that population of elderly internet users coming together is a massive group of people that could potentially have issues with any website. So we've got to make sure that's not the case. And fixing that issue alone is going to give startling results. People wouldn't even realize. So that's what happens if we fix all those. Happy paradise. Everyone's happy. Everyone's smiling, and it's a merry, merry, lovely time, and everything's fantastic. Okay? So that's what we aim to do. So the next thing is, how do we do that? So at Adido, there's 3 things we do. This is a cycle. So if we look at research, testing, innovation, research, testing, innovation, that's the cycle. That's how we do everything. Research comes first, testing, then innovation. It's a cycle that must not be broken. Neither step can be missed, and it's very important that's kept on track. Okay? So if we look a little bit more into research, research is where we gather the initial data. And I'm sure you've heard data too many times today from Andy, but data is very important, okay? How someone uses something, or that little number of how many times someone clicks a footer link or how they proceed, that's very important to how everything is affected, essentially. So that research, that data, we take. And that is an interesting part of case study with research, which I'd like to show you, is psychologists in Edinburgh. They did a study on the streets where they lost 80 wallets. Okay, so they lost them in the street. From that, back a second. Wallets, half of them had baby pictures, half of them didn't. So they were trying to calculate the return rate based on that factor alone. Can anyone guess the return rate of a wallet without a baby photo? 20%? Very close, 15%. So, that's Edinburgh streets. That's pretty good. That's 15%. And these wallets had money in as well. Okay? So there was all reason for that people to just keep them and not share. What do you think the return rate was for a wallet with a baby picture? Anyone hazard a guess? 60? 90? 95? Cool. It was 88%. 88%. Therefore, anyone sitting here today with a wallet who hasn't got a baby photo, get one right now. Because your return rate of a wallet you've lost is considerably better. Even if you don't have a kid in your family, just get a random photo. Okay? That's just the only way to take this research and see it for its merit. But without the data and originally and going forward with that, there was no way they could have known that. So research is highly important for this structure. Moving on from research, we have testing. Testing is the part where we start refining that data. So let's say here's research, big lump of data. Here's testing. We now need to refine this into information. We can't use the data. It's completely unbiased. It gives us nothing but the raw fact. So let's say we take that, we refine it into information through testing. So for example, how we could do this is research indicates people prefer the logo top left. Okay, so let's test that. On this particular site we're working on, using, for example, heat maps, we can see do people interact with our logo? Do they click it? We can even install real-time videos where we can watch a user in real time and see whether or not they click that or not. And if they do click it, do they expect it with the homepage? Do they feel a bit confused? Do they expect something else? So we can do that. So from that data, we can then test moving that logo to the right. And let's say we test on 10% of the audience using an A/B test. And an A/B test is where you test A against B. So A is original, B is the altered homepage. From that, we'll have a clear statistical evidence of which one is better. And likely, we'll probably find the right-hand logo was worse. That's most likely what we'll find. But we won't know until we test it. So that's why testing is pretty critical. And the case study finding from this is the case of the $300 million button. Has anyone ever heard of this before? Okay, so a large e-commerce website. Can't mention them. Where's Amazon? And they decided that their checkout process wasn't performing the way they expected. So they started testing individual elements to see why and what they can do to improve. So for example, they started removing things, started changing colors of things, playing with things. And as you can imagine, there's quite a lot of traffic, so they can do this almost daily and get results pretty quickly. So there was one little button they changed, and this became the $300 million button. Once it was removed, the e-commerce rate popped up by 45%, and for them, that was massive. So can anyone guess what that button was? A common button we see in today's e-commerce sites.
One-click purchase.
Yeah, pretty close, yeah. But it was the register button. How common was that? How common do you see a register button on an e-commerce website? It's one of those default buttons that everyone seems to add for no reason, really. So when they removed it, their yearly revenue popped up by $300 million. It's that one little button, because they concluded that the users who were buying things, they didn't want a relationship. They don't care for perhaps doing this again. They want to do it once, get the stuff, go. The register button made them think. Now they got to think, okay, do I trust this person or this website with my data, with my information, with something I own? And then they thought, nah. 45% of people said nah, and then they left. And then they lost that potential earnings. Fixing that one tiny issue gained them $300 million. And that's why testing is so critical. We have to test things, otherwise we will never know. Finally, these both lead on to innovation. So innovation, we can go two different ways. There's agile innovation and there's radical innovation. So with agile innovation, let's say it's this end, and radical is this end. Here, we would have iterative improvements. So based on the research and testing, we will say, okay, make this change. Then we repeat the cycle, each time popping up slightly on the conversion, or whichever the main goal might be. We can keep increasing. If it goes down, okay, stop. We've done something. Fixed, back up. We can continuously watch and make sure that's an iterative increase. Okay? With a radical, this is the more rare approach, but it does happen. This is normally based on if the research and testing indicates, look, site's crap, just do a full redesign. That's just the best way forward. So that happens, go radical. So you know the site was currently here, the redesign brings it here. That's normally a bigger boost, but that's more risky. So that's the one we only use if completely indicated that there's no way forward anymore with alliterative. In some cases, there isn't. You can only take a site as far as its weakest link. Sometimes improving it completely is the way forward. And we've got some fantastic results doing it that way. So the case study for innovation is the case of NASA. And I'm not sure if you've heard this one before, but it's basically based on the space race where American astronauts needed a pen that could work in outer space. Okay, so it needed to write upside down, work in zero gravity, do all those fancy astronaut things, and work on the moon, for example. They needed that. So they done their research, testing, innovation, 50 million spend, and eventually they came out with the space pen. Now that can go up in rockets, that can work on the moon, that can do anything they want. On the other hand, the Russians used a pencil. The answer existed all along. But that was radical of them, and they didn't need to reinvent the wheel. So when we get to innovation, it's critical that we make sure everything we do is based on research and testing, but it's also not reinventing the wheel. Today's world, almost everything exists. The research you can do on someone else's site, as competitor sites, for example, they may have already fixed this issue. So innovating ourselves may not be the correct way. So we can take the data from that and see. Okay? So innovation-wise, not always is this something that you need to do, but oftentimes it is. But in the case of America, it wasn't. So with all these together, again, back to the cycle, they have to go that way. Even if it is alliterative, it might take a week to go research, test, and innovation. Back to research. You need to research for innovation work. And that keeps on continuing going. For example, afterwards when they made that space pen, I'm sure they did some research and thought, Christ, why didn't we use a pencil? And that would have fixed that originally, and they would have saved the entire process. But they learned it. Okay? That's a nice little quote from Albert Einstein. Effectively, it means keep it simple. There's no reason whatsoever to overcomplicate things. There's no reason. So if we keep it simple, we will see improvements. We will see increases. There's absolutely no reason whatsoever to make it complicated. So that's in the back of our minds at all times. Don't overcomplicate things. Case studies. So I'm sure you'd like to see how we've done with these. I've only got 3 to show, but they're based on recent things. But firstly, as we can see from this, the Fortune 1000 companies, so these are the big boys. These are the ones that supposedly are meant to know what they're doing. They spend on average $2 million per year on site redesigns without even knowing if it made the site easy to use. How could they do that? They focus purely on the wrong things, it seems. But that's $2 million a year they're essentially throwing away on things that don't really matter. Okay? So taking that advice too, this is concept vehicle leasing. Sorry for the image quality, you can't really see much there. But they're a car leasing company based in Surrey. You can hire a van, a car, pretty much anything you want for any reason. And this is based on a year-on-year comparison between 2011 and 2012. And we was able to increase the inquiries by a factor of 13 times in that 1 year. And the amount of money they earned from this was dramatically more than the amount of money they paid us to do it. And this is now residual. This stays. Doesn't matter if we stop usability tomorrow, they still got this. And that will continue to earn money every single month. And how we did this? There was a very complex booking form originally with how you can get a vehicle. There was insurance details, etc. They asked for too much stuff. They made the user think. So we removed those type of things. We still qualified the person to make sure that it wasn't a spam or any of that type of thing. So that increase isn't just spam. And from that, they start getting really good inquiries. And I think they qualify roughly 1 in 8 these days, when it used to be 1 in 12 perhaps, but they would only see that 12, not as often as they'd like. So from this, they now make a lot of money, and they're very, very happy. Very happy. And this was based on alliterative, and then finally at the end, we had one big radical push as a redesign. And this is what helped them. Pushed them over that hump. Next, we got Primera Sports. This is, I'm not sure if you know them at all, but Primera is a Bournemouth-based company. They're e-commerce site for bikes, effectively, and bike wear. They're based in Bournemouth, but they ship internationally. They make quite a lot of money internationally. So the starts at the bottom, this is based on only a 3-month period of when we started the usability in the first place. Again, the power of mobile. We decided to start with the mobile site because we saw the percentage was quite high, and they weren't taking advantage of that, and it was quite hard to use the site on a mobile device. So we fixed that by making a mobile site. It's not, perhaps the best looking thing in the world, but it's usable. They can now use a mobile and buy something, and that was the critical part in this step. So the money they paid us to do this, they instead, once this was done, had a 6 times return on investment in that initial 3 months. And again, it's fixed now. It's fixed forever. They continue to use this mobile site. We now and again update certain things based on the research and the data. But mostly, this on its own can withstand and increase revenue month on month without us even touching it. Fix once, fix forever. Okay? Next, Bowplex. I'm sure you know Bowplex. Okay? But for those who don't, it's one of the UK's leading bowling service providers. They've got quite a good name, quite a good brand, and percentage in the mobile, again, quite high. So this is our newest usability client in terms of what we've been taking on. We started Bowplex in October. October the 17th, their mobile site went live. So this was based on, again, research, test, and innovation. We wanted to get the best thing. We studied heat maps, real-time videos, everything that we wanted and needed to do in order to make sure the users of Bowplex were getting the best what they expected. So we did that, mobile site came out. Within a 2-week period, we saw bookings pop up by 27%, almost immediately. Okay, so again, that proved their ROI. Was a business sense. They understand now the power. And that will continue to do that month on month. Fix once, fix forever. And to conclude, that's what I can leave you with. Okay, so that's the end of me.